Welcome to the new chapter of the Her Resources podcast. I'm your host, Linda Misegatis, and I'm so excited to be stepping into this next season with you solo. This podcast has always been about amplifying women's voices, exploring the challenges we face in HR, leadership, and life, and sharing the tools and inspiration we need to thrive. And now, I'm taking that mission even deeper. You'll hear real conversations with bold and authentic women, as well as reflections from me on everything from pay equity and burnout to confidence, leadership, and the messy, beautiful journey of growth. This is more than just a podcast, it's a community, a space for us to learn, lead, and lift each other up. Welcome to this new beginning. This is the Her Resources Podcast. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Her Resources Podcast, where we explore the intersection of leadership, work, and life through honest conversations with women who are navigating it all in real time. I'm your host, Linda Misegatis, and today we're talking about something that so many leaders are feeling but not always saying out loud. The world feels I can't talk today. The world feels chaotic. Change is constant, and yet somehow leaders are still expected to deliver results, keep their teams motivated, maintain culture, and make smart decisions, all while the ground keeps shifting beneath their feet. For years, we've heard the advice that when times change, leaders should pivot. But what happens when pivoting isn't enough? My guest today, Sonia Byrne, has spent more than 15 years helping leaders and teams untangle the complexities of communication, perception, and perspective so they can move forward with clarity, even in turbulent environments. Sonia is a leadership consultant who works with organizations around the world on strategic planning, succession planning, and team development. Her approach is thoughtful, mindful, and grounded in real-world leadership challenges. Today, we're having a very real conversation about what it actually takes to lead right now and how leaders themselves are holding up in the middle of it all. Sonia, welcome to the Her Resources Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it's great to have you here. I'm excited to talk about this because I was just reading an article around all of this. It's just, we're in such a weird state of chaos, I think, right now in businesses across the globe for sure. There's so much, it's a weird time to me. It's so much different than when the internet came about, right? I mean, I remember when the internet first came out and it was disruptive and scary a little bit, but not like right now. Right now, this is a weird change or a weird time. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about this. You describe this moment as a time when pivoting alone isn't enough. But what do you mean by that?
Well, the concept of pivoting really is a very internal concept. It's this idea that me as a leader, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to do something different.
Okay.
So I'm going to change or I'm going to shift. But that is only one piece of the puzzle. It's kind of like a sandwich. So you have the leader in the middle.
Yep.
And then the two pieces of bread here, we have the organizations and the senior leadership that are asking for results from the leader. So you've got stakeholders, sometimes shareholders, sometimes a board.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the people that do the work and work for a person who is their supervisor, boss, employer, leader.
Mm-hmm.
And that sandwich is really feeling a lot more compressed these days for the people who are people leaders. So I sometimes wonder, who takes care of the people who take care of the people? Because that idea of pivoting, I can do something different, but there are so many external forces coming at us. So there's what's happening for the employees and this sort of post-pandemic experience of expectations. There's what's happening for organizations who are really trying to keep their foothold in the market, the competition, the marketplace, margins, etc. So there's a lot of pressure. Pivoting is not enough.
No, that is for sure. What made you interested in this type of work? You've been doing it for a long time, but how did you get into it and why?
Well, before having my own business, which I opened just over 15 years ago, and I do leadership consulting. So I work with leadership teams, boards, and leaders individually as well.
Mm-hmm.
before that, I was a leader. So I come to it with what we call now lived experience. And
Right.
so for about another 15 years before I opened my business, I was a
Mhm.
leader, progressing in organizations. And even my very first roles outside of school, I ended up in very senior leadership roles, supporting very senior leadership, working with executive VPs, working with CEOs, working with presidents of organizations in support roles, mostly in a human resources, people, culture,
Mhm.
change capacity, supporting all of that for them. So I just kind of started out that way and got to see from a very early age the pressures that
Yeah.
leaders were under and how it was very dynamic and shifting and
Mhm.
changing. And the pressures felt like they were coming at the leaders, and they're having to constantly rebalance, but also because we're always in a role modeling moment when we're
Mhm.
leading, we have to be very cautious on the external speak while we still are processing things inside. And so navigating that in a few roles in my career and then deciding that it was time to go out. And I remember a colleague saying to me, you cannot be Buddha in the morning and the Axeman in the afternoon. Like your role in the work of your team spans all those. Like,
Yeah.
come be with us. We're a wonderful company, and we're going to exit you now. And
Right.
so he made this great grand um, premonition, which was very accurate, that eventually that pull would get to me. But
Yeah.
working externally in my own business, I can still do all those things. I can still help people who are retiring or leaving organizations when there's big change, and I can help people who are in the midst of really positive but still stressful uptick in size or breadth of responsibility in organizations. So when the teams and the individuals and leaders are going through change, but I do that for a client base. So I plug in at I'm doing this piece bringing people in, I'm doing this piece exiting people, I'm doing this piece with some funky change stuff that's happened in the middle of all of that. And
Yeah.
that seems to work better for me, works better for my consciousness, works better for my soul, works it's just a little more, grounding, balancing than trying to do all that inside
Absolutely.
an organization. The people who do those roles still in organizations are some of the people we're talking about today because 'cause they're very challenged to be the person who is motivating and then the person who maybe has to be the heavy sometimes, you know?
Yes. No, that's such a good point. What are you seeing leaders struggle with the most right now?
I had 3 leaders about a year ago from 3 different countries in the world speaking with me about a problem that they were going through, and it was the exact same problem, and it was very interesting that it all
Interesting.
landed on my desk at the same time,
Yeah.
and this issue was that they were all being accused of bullying, and they were
Interesting.
actually going to be exited from organizations. They were pretty sure that that was the way the organization was gonna go. They didn't feel like they were getting a fair shake at explaining themselves. They felt like their organizations were not backing them up even though they'd had careers of longevity inside these
Mm.
organizations. But the idea that there was a threat, inside the organization against leadership and the reputational challenge that that would, explain, and
Mhm.
that would expose and explain out into the world, in a way that would reduce credibility. So organizations would have to rebound from that, and just the anticipated experience of that had the organizations be in an experience of wanting to just have it go away
Mm.
and to have the what the leaders felt have the employees feel supported, and so that meant that without the leaders feeling there was due course of intervention and investigation, that they were likely going to just be quietly asked to leave. And so they were all 3 worried about how they would explain this in their next role and how they would explain
Oh,
this out in the
sure.
world. And what they said to me was, all 3 of them said, "I'm not even sure that I was bullying. I wasn't really doing anything that I would do differently 5 years ago. But
Yeah.
the organization wants results. I am encouraging, motivating, pushing my people for results in the way that I always have, and somehow now
Mhm.
it's not okay, and somehow now I'm upsetting the employees, and somehow now my company feels that I should be able to motivate results and not have any employees upset." And I'm somehow right now, not being a good leader by the definition
Right.
of the current moment in the organization. So one person left their organization. One person became a consultant, and the other person is still looking for a job. And so
Mm.
this is very upsetting for the people. This is a trend that I'm seeing, and I think it's resulted in what we have seen as the Great Resignation was initially
Mhm.
employees
Yep.
leaving organizations in post pandemic,
Right.
and then about 18 months after that Great Resignation, there was the Great Resignation Leadership Edition. So the
Yes.
senior
Yeah.
leaders started to go because they were thinking, I can't function in this environment. I can't
Right.
feel successful if we can't have results, and I can't be the leader. Now, I'm not in
Mhm.
any way trying to disparage a situation or minimize
Oh, for
situations
sure.
of real people misusing power and authority and real experiences of bullying. That's not what I'm saying. But there was just a wave, and it seems to have calmed
Mm.
down a little. But a lot of people have left to go do their own
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, kind of the buzz phrase that was going around for a little while was the VUCA world, right? Was
Mm.
the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, right?
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if some of that is tied to that because the expectations that are really placed on leaders today, it does feel enormous because
Mm.
it's about results, whether you're public or private, engagement, culture, strategy. But has leadership fundamentally changed, or are we still trying to attack and approach all of these problems the same way we did 20, 30, 40 years ago? Like, what are you seeing around all of that?
I'm saying that the expectations of both employees and leaders are different. They've changed.
Yeah.
I can see that the environment that we're working in has changed, but the processes and the way that we train leaders and the way that we set up policies, et cetera, inside organizations, the cultural pieces haven't
Mm,
shifted significantly. Some organizations have tried to, and they've tried to do, like a Google approach, and they're cool. They've got bags of
right.
potato chips and espresso machines in an area that people share. There's people are able to do hybrid work or be at home, and I think this movement in general comes from a really good place. It's this idea of rebalancing what was maybe a
Yeah.
way out of balance kind of world that maybe the Gen Xers would have really
Mhm.
seen. And so the gift of other generations coming up is that they don't want to play by those rules and have that as an environment where work takes over your entire life. And maybe that's a good thing, but I don't think we're
Right.
done. It's kinda like the sands are shifting, and I don't think we're done
Mhm.
figuring out what a good model would be, and the model probably shifts or changes by sector. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can definitely
Yeah.
see that we're still moving about in that. And speaking of generations, we have as many as 6 generations in the workplace right
Yes.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, with
It
all
is
with
really
different
crazy.
values. Yeah.
That's it exactly. Kirsten Scroggin, who has been on the show before, she runs her organization called Gen Y, and that's what she talks about is all the generational differences and how the impact that
Mhm.
that has on leadership today as well. Because now layer another thing on top of everything else we have to figure out, right? Now you layer in the generational differences and how people want to interact with one another. It does add some extra, stuff to
Mhm.
it all for sure,
For
so
sure.
I have exciting news. The Her Resources podcast is opening sponsorships. If your brand supports women in HR and leadership, think talent, well-being, learning, pay equity, coaching, productivity, or mission-driven tech, this is your moment. Our listeners are decision makers and change makers who show up for real conversations and practical tools every week. We offer flexible options, pre-roll or mid-roll host reads, series sponsorships, and thought leadership integrations that highlight your story without the fluff. Ready to connect with a highly engaged audience and grow with us? Email contact@herresourcespodcast.com and put sponsorship in the subject line. I can't wait to collaborate. What are some of the hidden pressures that leaders carry that people don't often see? Because I think that's another thing that employees often don't it's always easy to armchair quarterback a game, right? So, similarly in leadership is that a lot of times I think that there are all of these hidden pressures that employees aren't necessarily seeing. What are some of those? And maybe it'll help as to gain perspective.
Well, employees share a lot more in the workplace than I think they ever did. There was this real demarcation, 20, 30 years ago. Like
Mm-hmm.
this was home and this was
Yes.
work. And now these little things here
That's
have
right.
done a lot to
Yeah, that is
collapse those
true.
worlds, right?
That is true,
And
yeah.
yeah, and so now there isn't such a demarcation. There isn't such a line. So I think that leaders are on a whole lot. And I think that employees don't necessarily see that. Employees talk about more, which is great. And we've made
Mhm.
the workplace more human and more humane. I mean, if
Right.
someone's coming on to a Zoom meeting and there's a problem and it's 2019, you think, wow, why does that person have a problem getting onto Zoom? What is their deal? Right. And now we got cats walking by and
Right.
all the things. So, like,
Yes, yeah.
there's some good stuff going on too that we've relaxed. We've relaxed in, our clothing, in our language,
Mhm.
etcetera. So, there's just a certain amount of that has been really good because people can just get about the work of business. But because, leaders are holding on to a lot of what's going on for people and
Mhm.
trying to be sensitive, so we're trying to be fair by perhaps treating people differently but fairly, and we're
Yeah.
bumping into, well, we wanna make sure we're not into any favoritism or anything like that.
Mhm.
I think the people that are in leadership roles right now too, so say if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you have a lot going on outside of work. And you
Yeah.
are either taking care of kids or you're a sandwich generation where you've got
Mhm.
adults and, older adults and kids that you're taking care of. It's a lot, and with the pressures of society currently, there's been a real uptick in, drug usage, alcohol usage, all the things we do to check out, and so
Right.
that is showing up in the workplace more too. So all of that energy and all that upset that as a leader, they say it's lonely at the top, and that is true because
Right.
you don't want to be telling other people your stuff. So you really
Right.
do need that kind and supportive network of people who are equal to you so that you don't share with your employee base and change the
Mhm.
role modeling of leadership because I've seen that happen in people thinking
Yeah.
that they're being friendly and it goes really badly because it comes back on them. So there's a
Yes.
lot a lot to consider right now in that collapsing, I think.
Yeah. No, you bring up some really good points. And I think so, if we think that if leaders are now expected to hold everything together, then
Mhm.
how do they actually do that? And so, I want to talk a little bit about how do we navigate that chaos without losing your team, but also maybe a little bit about how not losing yourself either. So, but when everything feels uncertain, how can leaders create stability with their teams? Because I do think right now, particularly, I think with the advancement of AI, agentic AI specifically, the talk about all of these jobs going away, a lot of uncertainty in the market today, it's a hard time. And leaders are feeling some of that too, because the other thing that we're seeing is a lot of white collar employees are being let go as well. And so the pressure is on for you individually, but also, how do I create that stability for my team?
Mhm. I think part of what I had just mentioned around having that good group of people that are peers that do what you do.
Yeah.
So I've seen a real increase in masterminds or
Mhm.
CEO groups or leader groups or pods that spin off of even something like Rotary or Board of Trade, so that you
Yeah.
have somebody that you can connect with who does what you do and if people are more junior in their career, they might want to get, as a leader, they might want to get a mentor to be able to help them. as well. And for
Yeah.
some people that are in older generations, they have found it's just as useful to have a mentee because they have a
Mhm.
reality check
That's
on
true.
what's happening with the Gen
Yeah.
Y or Gen Z or whatnot. And there's as much learning. It's going both
That
ways.
is so true.
So yeah, that support network, whatever that looks like. But also, I think we need to also take care of ourselves
Mhm.
internally. And so, years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I had this inkling that there was something around spirituality and business. And those were the words I had at the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was new, just a couple of years into my business, but I had also been very much working at that intersection of what I had called business and spirituality when I was working my last couple of corporate experiences as well.
Yeah.
And that made me um, popular. My team was a real go-to team when there were
Mm.
things going on, and leaders just really wanted to talk. They wanted a
Mhm.
sounding board. They wanted to
Yeah.
know that what they were doing was well legal, but also that what the best way, and trying to imagine the impact and trying to imagine the approach. And they didn't have anybody else to talk to about that. So me and my team, we became the
Mhm.
people that you would come to.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So we have to take care of ourselves internally with that idea of this business and spirituality, which is the intersection I believed I was working at when I started my business. It's really gone
Mhm.
into other things like conscious leadership, mindful
Yeah.
leadership. And so I went off and did a master's degree in
Mhm.
consciousness studies so that I could get more of the background, the science, the philosophy around what it would
Yeah.
take for a leader to be in that space and to be able to filter their decisions and their conversations, their actions and words through a more conscious mindset. So I think a lot of people are on a reading journey, a YouTube journey, a
Mhm.
learning journey, whatever that takes. I can tell you that when I'm working with leaders one on one or small leadership groups, I have never said to people more than I'm currently saying that they need to stay in observation to be able to,
Oh,
when
interesting.
some negative feedback comes from employees,
Mhm.
that they need to hear the feedback and see the feedback and honor the feedback and really
Yeah.
deeply listen. But they don't always have to respond right then and there unless it's a matter of urgency, etc. And even then, it's a good idea to build in the possibility that we'll pick up this conversation again later when there's been a little more
Mhm.
time for thoughtful
Yeah.
processing. But, being in observation because so many times we're hijacked by just negativity and a negative or bad experience coming
Yeah.
towards us. And the natural human reaction, somebody says something and we meet them there and you're sort of off to the races.
So
And I'm
true.
really encouraging leaders to just stop and while they're even maybe hearing or when they're processing the conversation afterwards,
Mhm.
to look at the body language and to listen to the tone and to also consider what might be going on for this person and what's not being
Mm.
said and what's behind this. And so
Yeah.
I think that piece of advice it sounds simple, but it is really important for leaders right now.
Mhm. I would agree with that for sure. Well, and it's interesting because we are seeing, I think, a big surge. Most of the books that are even being introduced or talked about right now aren't even new books. I mean, some of these books have been
Mhm.
around forever. I just think that
Yeah.
maybe now we're ready to look at that, especially things like around like the mindful leader, the whole idea of being present, the idea of Angela Duckworth's book on grit. None of those things are new concepts. Most of those books were written years ago. It's just now people seem to be in a place to receive that information slightly different. One of the areas that you specialize in is communication. So why do you think that communication breaks down in chaotic times?
Well, when we're in a chaotic experience or a stressful experience, it could be work related or it could be a life experience that's seeping into our consciousness, the time that we have available for work. And what ends up happening is that our amygdala in our brain, that area that processes the fear, gets kind of hijacked,
Mm.
and we go into a spin in there.
Yeah.
And then we're unable to go over to the places in our brain that are responsible for logic and curiosity. And
Okay.
curiosity is really, really key. This is part of that observational stance and to be able to look and say, what's going on here? What is really happening,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think that that is definitely the biology of it.
Okay.
And because the responses that we have in leadership or otherwise in life
Mhm.
are actually habits. And if we
Oh,
think of
interesting.
our
Yeah.
responses as habits,
Yeah.
then when we reduce something to the level of a habit, we are able to then work with a habit. It's just a habit. Now, breaking
Right.
a habit is a whole other thing, but it does
Right.
take awareness and then willingness
Yeah.
and then the fortitude to be able to practice moving into something that's more functional or helpful. And a habit that we had in communicating 10 years ago might have been fine, but it just imagine today the habits
Mhm.
that we have had to change because of being in a post-pandemic world where we're doing what
Mhm.
we're doing right now. So the
Right.
idea that people are more in their homes, the idea that you lose, 3/4 of the body language because you're only seeing from the shoulders up, and then our brains and our own sense of intuition and consciousness has to work a little harder
Mm.
to be able to assess and understand a situation in communication with a lot less
Yeah.
available. So sometimes we're missing
Yeah.
tone when companies have a lot of message
So
board
true.
type technology. We miss
Yes.
tone and body language. And so
Yeah.
I in the historical academic concept of communication, the mathematics of it is that words are 7%.
Mhm.
And so we're
Mhm.
relying a lot on words. We put a lot of weight on words and very little tone, and we've lost a lot of body language. And
Yeah.
so when you consider how we have to communicate and that we need to be able to be just as comfortable communicating on Zoom as we would be
Mhm.
in front of a group of people in hybrid or actually live in front of people in a workplace boardroom setting, for instance.
Yeah.
And our communication would be different. And if we think that it's just the same, then we
Right.
we run the risk of really being misunderstood or that there can be stress, shutdowns, arguments, quiet resentment.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I laugh sometimes too because I think in written communication, when the emojis came into work communication, even those can be misunderstood because I know sometimes if I'm reading an email and it has like a smiley face after, I'm thinking to myself, she's being sarcastic. Because I'm reading that emoji. It's like, that's not friendly. That's sarcasm. And I'm sure that wasn't what the intention was at all, or maybe it was, and I'm reading too much into it. But it is kind of funny how now we're trying to use these different ways to emote that type of tone into that written communication. And
Yeah.
you're right, even in these situations here, when we're on Zoom calls or Teams meetings, it is really hard to know. I find we're always so much more productive when we can all get in a boardroom together when it's something really important that needs your attention because it's also incredibly distracting, right? Because we know people are multitasking. If they have multiple screens, they might be talking, but you can kind of see that they're over here maybe typing an email. And now you're offended by that because you're like, well, they're not engaged in this conversation. You're not mindfully present. It really starts to create those difficult feelings, right, that come into all of that. And then trying to
Mhm.
lead through that is even really interesting as well. So I'm curious what role perception and perspective play in how teams interpret leadership decisions. Because I watch that all the time in
Mm.
organizations and even in my own is how people are interpreting what leadership is actually doing.
Yeah, this is where curiosity becomes so important
Oh, that's a really good
because,
point.
yes, because perception and perspective are all built in life experiences.
True.
And
Yeah,
we all come to
that is true.
conversations with really different life experiences. And then you add in the experience of the day. So, have I had enough coffee? Am I hungry? Have I been
Mhm.
running from meeting to meeting to have an argument with my spouse? Am I uncomfortable with world events? And then we bring all of that in. So you've got all the past coming
Mhm.
into the conversation with you. Then you have the present situations. And then we have everything we're worried about in the future. And then we put a lot of pressure on little old words to be able
Yes,
to
yes.
communicate. And what we don't have is like a little dispenser where a note drops out like a Christmas list to
Yeah.
Santa, where I say what I'm saying, but under it, it says, Linda, be careful with Sonia today because she had a bad
Yes.
breakfast and she nearly had an accident on the way to work. And she's upset because her mother is having a medical procedure. And she's a little worried about this finance report and if everyone has their numbers in it. But all you say is, how are things going? I'm like, oh, good, fine.
Yes. Yeah,
But you
such a
don't
good
know that
point.
all that is there. It's like,
No. That is
yeah,
so true. Yeah,
yeah. And so it
that
can
is
shade the
fascinating.
the perspective is really about looking at what can happen in
Mm,
a situation and how it will impact others. So we're looking at the perspective. It's a very round concept. Perception is very much an internal um, calibration, and we
mm.
are really left at the level of our feelings, our education, our past experiences that are similar, our past experiences with this person, and that creates that perception. So
Okay.
one is very internal, and the other is very much looking at what's around us. But to our conversation here, both are really
Mhm.
really affected by who we are.
Are you ready to take your podcast to the next level? Let LJM Productions help you sound your best. We specialize in podcast editing, production, audio restoration, and mixing, ensuring every episode is polished, professional, and ready to wow your audience. Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned podcaster, we'll handle the technical details so you can focus on sharing your voice. Partner with LJM Productions today and hear the difference.
That makes such a good point because I know I have found, that in my own experience because maybe I've been through layoffs in companies. I've worked for
Mhm.
big tech firms before, and so, layoffs don't have the same emotional impact to me. They're hard. I hate them. I had to be a part of delivering messages back in the day. They're really hard. But I also understand their business decisions. They're not personal. Like, these are things that have to happen, and they're very challenging for leaders and HR, the people who have to deliver these messages. But if you've never experienced that, or you've never been through it, or maybe you've worked for the same company for 30 years who's never laid an employee off before, and now suddenly they're laying everybody off, that experience, to your point, I'm going to have a much different reaction in those scenarios, right?
Absolutely. Two people going through the exact same experience with very different emotional reactions, very different perceptions, perspectives, very different way of taking it all in. Absolutely.
Yeah. How can leaders rebuild trust and or clarity, maybe even when employees are feeling overwhelmed or disengaged? Because again, right now, there's so much going on in organizations across the globe, and we're all feeling this overwhelm, and maybe there's this disengagement. There's a lot of burnout that's happening. How can leaders rebuild trust? Because we put a lot of it on the leader, right? We blame the leader
Yeah.
for everything. We put the pressure on them to solve the problem. So how can they rebuild that trust and clarity?
No, I can simply say that the role of leadership is to instill hope.
I like that.
So people want to feel hopeful.
Yeah.
At the same time, they want transparency. They don't want to be lied to.
Mhm.
They want clear boundaries and rules and expectations, and they want some flexibility.
Yeah, that is
So
true.
this is the juggling act that
Yes.
leaders do. And they don't want to instill false hope. You can't Pollyanna a situation
No.
and
Mm-mm.
then have the bottom drop out of a conversation or a project and then expect that the employees are going to trust your happy face. But
Yes.
this is where I think being honest and being being friendly but not the friend, which is very old
Yes.
but true advice. There's a
Yes.
new version of that, which is to be transparent but still confidential and holding the level of discernment that's required as a
Right.
leader. Yeah. So setting the expectations with a group, with a team, that what transparency looks like. And you don't have to talk about it in terms of transparency as a value. You can talk about it in
Yeah.
terms of processes or projects or policies, all the P's,
Mhm.
procedures. So you can set the expectations by saying that there will be another update at a certain time, or this is what we know for now, or laying it out in layers, or laying it out in little bites, like breadcrumbing a situation, because people are also taking in a lot of information.
That is
And
true.
so, while we don't want to insult their intelligence, I think having that layered approach and breadcrumbing is
Yeah.
is kind, I think, to people's minds.
Yeah. That is very true. What mistake do you see leaders often making when they're trying to motivate teams during turbulent times? Because I'll see that too, where leaders are trying to balance transparency with not creating anxiety, but then now they're trying to rally the troops. And so,
Mm,
what are some of the
yeah.
mistakes that we see leaders making?
There's a rigidity, there's a polarity that happens. So I see two
Mm,
things. And it's like there's a mercurial reaction that happens. And it's
yeah.
because we're processing as leaders our own stuff. So either people get super soft and kind and actually overshare. And while
Yeah.
that in the moment seems to build relationship and
Hmm.
trust, as soon as that crisis or the chaos settles down a bit, the employees will feel like you're not the leader anymore, like you're broken, and they'll
Yeah.
Humpty Dumpty you back.
That's a good point.
But then they'll go
Yes.
look for a different leader or a different job, or they'll forever have this strange impression of you, or a second layer of conversation, like, but will start to happen
Hmm.
when things happen. Do you know what they did the last time? So that's the kind of softness problem. And then there's the hardness problem, the other polarity, where they
Yeah.
clam up, get rigid because they're in their own fear. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, the balance of, and then they stop hearing people, and they
That's
seem like a
true.
jerk, and that starts happening, like they
Hmm.
were a jerk last time. Don't
Yeah.
count on them. You can't go to them.
Right.
So I mean, it's almost impossible to to be a leader feeling good about yourself and be
Yeah.
always perceived. So one of the things that happens is if people can find a place in the middle, and that might mean just taking a moment to recalibrate or a moment to process things and come back. I'll have more news for you tomorrow, kind of thing. And again, that goes to
Yeah.
the layering and the breadcrumbing.
Yep.
But the thing that's the what I see them do, either going to one side or the other. And it takes a certain amount of leadership maturity
Mhm.
to have the level
Yeah.
of discernment to stand in the storm and not be consumed by the storm, and still lead and still take care of yourself. That's a lot to
Yeah.
ask. 'Cause it's not like it
That is
happens
a
one
lot to
time in your
ask.
career.
No,
30 years ago, that was like something that happened once every few years. Now it's
that's
like
true.
every 2 or 3 weeks there can be something.
That That is so true. I love that you just brought that up because we talk a lot about supporting teams and the organization, but we don't really talk enough about what leaders themselves actually need. And you kind of touched on this a little bit with finding a group or those confidants that you can have these conversations with. But how are leaders kind of personally coping with the weight of these expectations? What are you seeing out there today?
Yeah. Well, there's non-functional coping, but I'm gonna
Mm,
talk about the functional coping.
yeah,
So
good.
because there's all kinds of places to go to kinda, like, just numb out, right? But, in terms of functionally coping, having that person or that group or that practice, this is why mindfulness
Mhm.
has become so important. Mindfulness, it's more than just, uh, practicing meditation till you levitate kind of thing.
Right.
Even if people do a small amount of mindfulness, just centering in,
Mhm.
noticing what's here, doing 10 seconds of meditation, doing 1 minute of meditation, taking a coffee break and calling it, this is my
Yeah.
special self-care time. What we name it in our brain will kind of go along with it. So having that training, so those moments of mindfulness allows leaders, allows people, anyone who's doing mindfulness over time, to just be able to handle challenging situations better. There's an
Yeah.
improved ability because it gives you perspectives, it gives you pause, it gives you balance. You stepped out of all of the static of the fuss of what was going on in your life. So I definitely think that I'd always encourage a leader to do some level of mindfulness and to have people around them. When I started my business in 2009, I
Mm-hmm.
had a coaching practice in Toronto.
Okay.
I started in Toronto at the time. And I was taking people, so 2009, you had the 2007, 8, 9 situation
Mm-hmm.
happening financially. And
Yes,
even though
yes. Yep, exactly.
we were in Canada and the situation really came across the border from the United States, there was a lot of parent companies that were American. A lot of people were impacted by either losing their
Right.
jobs or being downsized for the second or third or fourth time, or
Mm-hmm.
having the stress of being the one that got to stay. No one won in that
Right.
situation,
Yeah.
right? There was no good card to receive. And
No.
so I had a practice, and I had people coming in from like 9 in the morning to 9 at night, and I had to limit it to a certain number of spaces and a certain number of days a week. And people would like to come. The most popular times were like 6 to 9 at night. So I was getting out of there at 10
Okay.
o'clock at night sometimes
Oh
to do
gosh, yeah.
one-on-one leadership
Yeah.
and organizational coaching, but it was so needed. Now, I don't do that in the same way these days.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very small coaching portfolio, and it's usually pretty senior leaders. It's just
Yeah.
developed that way over
Yeah.
time because so much of my work is group based. But the people that do sit with me, what I do hear, and I do hear this from other people who have coaches who aren't me, they say that just having that 45, 50 minutes or whatnot to just download all of the stuff that's
Yeah.
happening and to get a perspective from somebody who has lived experience, has lived
Yes.
that world
Yes.
of organizational politics and hierarchy and
Mm-hmm.
challenges. That is it's very helpful, and the sounding board is that you need sometimes. And I have clients that I've been with for 15 years who I
Yeah.
work with them during a change or a downsizing, and then I'll see them, maybe 3 years later. They'll call me up and say, "Okay, something else has happened. I have this crazy team. Can I come talk to you?" I'm like, "Sure."
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, because where we are in our lives, who we are, whether we're dealing with our kids, our parents, our partners, our friends, and then we go to work, we're not any different. Like, we are who we are. And
That
so,
is true. Yeah.
yeah, we'll end up talking with people who I recall one person who had a sales team, and it was a really male dominated environment, this particular environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was telling me about like what was happening with his sales guys.
Yeah.
And I was listening to that, and then I asked him about the support at home, and it turns out he has 3 sons. Well, all the dynamics that were playing out with his 3 sons were playing out with his team. So
Oh,
we are who
sure.
we are. Wherever we go,
Yeah.
there we are. Yeah.
That is such a good point. And I think we forget about that, about leaders, about people in general, is that, and I do think we maybe an older school way of thinking, as we've heard again so much of the idea of authenticity in the workplace and bringing your whole self, and those are all very new concepts as well. Because I always joke when my kids were little, I pretended like I didn't have kids because you never would have, you didn't bring that into the
Mhm.
work, and your job certainly could care less about what was happening in your actual life. It was like, this is your work life, this is your home life, and neither the two shall meet. And that whole attitude and atmosphere has changed a lot, and I think probably really changed during COVID because we had no choice. Our employer was suddenly sitting in our living room with us, right? And so if you'd never had that experience of working from home before, all of a sudden you had your company right there with you. And I don't think we've that has carried forward. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I actually do think that
Yeah.
is a good thing that came out of it because we are who we are. I am a mother, a wife, a daughter, all of these different things. And all of that makes me who I am. And that's who I have to be when I come to work as well. And I do think that that's a really good point that you bring up. And we forget that about leaders, that they also have lives and their moms or dads or, brothers or sisters or sons or daughters, like they have those same things as well. So,
Hmm. Exactly.
yeah. No, that's a really good point. If someone is listening today that is a leader who feels like they're barely holding it together, what would you want them to hear?
I'd want them to hear that that is a completely normal experience. That is completely within the range of normal and common. So people don't like the word normal, so I used common these days. But you're having a
Yeah.
completely very common experience. Stop, breathe. What can you do right now? What's yours? What's not yours? What's within your control? What's not? So going to curiosity with those questions is
Yeah.
a really good way because we pull out from the intensity. We pull out with curiosity from like a neuroplasticity, neurobiological perspective. We pull back, and so it allows
Yeah.
us to use our brain differently, and it will calm down some of the intensity of the feelings for sure. Curiosity is a game changer.
Hey everyone, we're the Her Resources podcast, where women share real stories, real lessons, and the resources that help them succeed. We're always looking for inspiring women, business leaders, creatives, educators, and changemakers who want to share their journey and empower others. If that sounds like you, we'd love to hear your story. Reach out to us at contact@herresourcespodcast.com and let's start the conversation. My co-host, my former co-host Cindy Manuel, that's one of her favorite things to say when she gives advice is be curious. And
Mm.
so I love that that's what you're talking about there as well, because I do think curiosity makes a big difference in everything in those interactions. So after working with leaders around the world, because that's the other, I think you bring a unique perspective in that you're not just in your home country, you have experience, global experience with leaders. What have you learned about resiliency in leadership?
Mm. Resiliency is very different culturally. So the geographical expectation, what resiliency looks like,
Yeah.
is different. So I've worked in the Middle East, Europe, much of North America, and a little in South America. And uh, people have a more casual way of looking at life, and so it's
Yeah.
like we'll get through this. So
Uh-huh.
there's a sense of community resiliency in some cultures,
Okay.
like you're not on your own. And then other
Yeah.
cultures, the saving face is very high, and so the
Okay.
idea that you could publicly look like you have failed or let somebody down is the
Mm,
worst thing in the world. And in some
yeah.
cultures, we honor that. We honor the vulnerability. We honor the messiness a little bit more than other
Yeah.
cultures. And so I've definitely learned that resiliency looks different. But we are unable to be resilient if we're not able to be curious. We're unable to be resilient if we're not able to learn and progress and be in some level of discernment and decide how
Mm-hmm.
we want to change or not change. The biggest key to resiliency is awareness of what's ours, what's not ours, what we want to do, what habits we want to change, which ones we're okay with. Sometimes I talk
Mm-hmm.
with leaders and I'll give them, I mean, I'm known for a bit of an obtuse approach. I'm very, very direct and
Mm-hmm.
still caring and everything, but I'm not going to waste anybody's time. And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
I've had to say to leaders, like, "You are really being perceived like a" there's
Mm-hmm.
some words for it, but I'm just gonna say jerk. So you're really being
Yeah.
perceived like a jerk out on the floor or
Yeah.
among your employees. And so they'll think that I'm there to discipline them. even though they've
Oh,
hired me, right?
interesting.
They'll think that I'm going to give them a hard time. And instead it turns a corner. This is the obtuse part. So it turns a corner. So I will end up saying to them, well, this is fine. We're going to create awareness. And now that we have
Mhm.
awareness, you can decide what you want to do with that. And you can
Yeah.
take some level of action. And maybe
Yeah.
your action is, I really want to change this. I don't like the way that this looks. Or maybe
Okay.
your action is, um, I'm going to leave the organization and go start a new job in another organization, and I'm not going to be a jerk. Like
Okay.
sometimes people need
Yeah.
a clean slate, and people
Sometimes
actually
they
do
do.
that,
That
right?
is true.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The third door number 3 and all that is this okayness. Like, yeah, I think I've heard that before, and I know I come across that way, and there's some benefits to being that, and there's some difficult parts to being that, and I'm really okay with that. So, yeah, I'm gonna be okay with that.
Yeah. No,
And
I
so if
like
they're
that.
okay with it and and it still causes a problem in the organization, I'll
Yeah.
often suggest that they hire to the complement, which means that they get somebody in who
Mm.
has a softer place about all that or fulfills a skill set in that particular aspect that they don't have, and that
Okay.
matching sort of bridges the environment for the employee base. So they have a few
That's really good
choices. Yeah.
advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because then I'm not asking you to change, and maybe you're an effective leader. It's just you have this component about you, and so if there's an opportunity to find, to find that person who can come in and help
Mhm.
complement that side of you, then yeah, I think that's
Mhm.
that's really great advice to give to someone. So, what is one thing leaders should stop doing right now?
Hmm. They should stop being so hard on themselves.
Mm. Yep. Yeah, that's a good one for sure. I hear that all the time. That is leaders being hard on themselves. Not that they should stop, but leaders being hard on themselves. So you see that this constant questioning and wondering, and I wonder your thoughts too related to that is
Mhm.
how much employee surveys actually contribute to that being hard on themselves and how much value actually comes out of all of that as well, because sometimes there's good in that
Mhm.
and sometimes there's just not, especially if maybe the environment is not where you quite want it to be right now.
Yeah. Well, if you're being hard on yourself, which as you say, a lot of leaders are, w that whole I'm being hard on myself and that spinning, that hijacking that can
Mhm.
happen, that negative, sense of self is not helpful. It's not helpful and not
No, it is
effective. So
not.
you have to decide how long you're gonna spend in that town. That
Yeah.
that town of self-pity, right? Like, don't buy a
Yeah,
condo,
yeah.
don't even pitch a tent, just keep walking through, right?
Yep.
And so then you gotta go and do something because eventually you go into action.
Yeah.
And so if they can go into action, that really looks at, what I wanna have happen, what could happen differently, what we've all learned from this,
Mhm.
then they're sharing it as a teachable moment and some people are sometimes more predisposed to be tougher on themselves, and it comes from a good place. It does. It
Yes.
comes from this
Yeah.
desire to do well and to have good results and to be a good person and to live
Mhm.
up to some measure of success that yours or you inherited. But
Yeah.
and these employee surveys, I actually just had an employee survey with an organization, and the leaders were very concerned about what was going to come out of it. And so I
Okay.
did a lot of coaching with them around how to help what anticipate it and then what to do with it. And this
Mhm.
idea of observation before they went into response was really the practice I gave them. And it was tough because they were often, and they had a habit of being familiarly hijacked by bad feedback, and they would go down in the
Mhm.
bad feedback and kind of reside down there for a while, and it paralyzed their ability to be role models and leaders. It didn't look like a leadership role model from the outside, and employees began to catch on to that. And
Oh, okay.
this you can lose some credibility with your employee group by doing that. But also employees can be taught or can learn on a conscious or on a subconscious level
Yeah.
that if they complain about it, then we get to pause everything. So if things are going too fast, if we make a big complaint, we're all gonna we're gonna just stop and pause
Yeah.
for a bit. Sometimes that's a very necessary tactic, but sometimes it can be overused. And if a person's feeling
Yeah.
like, that this is not a good fit, this location, this place, this sector, this organization is not a good fit for them anymore. Some of that is the norms that have been created, even unintentionally, of how you're going to
Yeah,
treat me and how I'm going to treat you and what I'm going to tolerate and where my trip buttons are. And so if you know them,
that's true.
you can take me down and I will pause and I'll stop having expectations of you for a little bit because we're going to go into the
Yeah,
chaos of solving something that people are upset about. And I've seen it happen in organizations where there is a continuous loop of that.
that's
And
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and people aren't even aware sometimes they're doing it. They're all just trying to get
Right.
by, They're just trying to get
Yes,
by.
yeah, absolutely. That is it, but that's an interesting observation for sure. What is one thing that leaders should start doing immediately?
Mm. Pausing. If they
Yeah.
haven't done something that is in the realm of mindfulness, they can do it as a big secret and hide it if they want. It doesn't matter. I've seen people do what they need to do. Stepping into a
Yes.
closet, taking a breath.
Right.
Seriously, I have stories, but just getting some tools for yourself around mindfulness, because you can be not happy with the idea of mindfulness and you can judge it if you
Mhm.
want. You call it something different if you need to. It's leadership pause or whatnot, but the
Yeah.
mindfulness is the gateway to having a whole other set of abilities in moments of chaos.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
seem like a direct line. It doesn't seem like if I go in and pause and meditate and take care of
Mhm.
myself, or separate and take a breath, if I do that, that somehow I'm going to perform better in a difficult conversation later. But because of the parts of our brain that we're training allows us to get more perspective, which you'd mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
it changes our perception and everything isn't happening to us.
Yes, yeah. That is such a good point. I really love that you focus a lot on mindfulness because I know that's something that I've embraced a lot over the last few years is really trying to focus in on that. Even little things that we take for granted, like breathing. We talk about just box breathing, and
Yes.
starting to track that. And I know there's even different apps out there, and
Hmm.
there's lots of
Yeah.
companies that are coming out with different ways, but you can use your watch. Like if you notice that even if you're on a call and maybe that's a person who's maybe gonna, that's gonna be a frustrating conversation, take those
Yeah.
couple of minutes, breathe, center yourself, be a little more mindful in the conversation. Maybe you notice then it's a better interaction in that because you already know that this person maybe gets a rise out of you every single time you have a conversation. But little things like that, I
Yeah.
think, make a big difference. Yeah.
Linda, one of the things that I've seen that has happened for leaders is that they're able to create a second track
Mm,
of what is happening, and then their assessment of what is happening. And
yeah.
that requires a level of discernment that mindfulness
Mhm.
gets them to. So you can
Yeah.
be in a meeting and you can be practicing mindfulness in a meeting, and people say, "Oh, that's crazy. How can you do that? I can't close my eyes, or I'm gonna just
Right,
zone out,"
right.
but you can actually develop through mindfulness practice. A lot of people that I have worked with have developed this idea of, okay, I'm watching it, I'm participating, I'm still actively listening, but over here I'm thinking, "Oh, I'm so 7 out of 10 in this situation right now with anger. Okay,
Yeah.
let's back that down. Let's back that down. Let's back." And so you're having conversations of consciousness at the same time.
Yeah.
Things like authenticity or integrity aren't just names on a wall or values.
Right.
You know how to live them, and you get to practice living them if you can step back and think about them, and again engage discernment, and with a mindful approach, you're able to live that. And so there's a big difference
Yeah.
between having a leader that throws these around, these
Right.
terms, and another one that says, it uses it as a filter. So we will not be
Yeah.
authentic if we do that. So how else can we do this? Let's be creative. Let's brainstorm. How else? What are our other choices for handling this situation? That's all going to allow us to sleep at night. That's a
Right.
very
Yeah.
sophisticated leadership conversation.
Yes, that is. That is.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it takes practice to get there, but people can get there. But it starts with awareness.
I like that. What gives you hope about the future of leadership?
That people are on these learning journeys. that people who had maybe even roles that would not have been engaging in these type of
Uh-huh.
tactics or these type of tools now do. I had a
Yeah.
call from a gentleman who's been in manufacturing for 32 years, and he has a production group, and he has a shift start meeting, and the shift start meeting, they do gratitude. And
Okay.
he said, and like I get chills when I hear that, right? Because
Yeah.
gratitude is definitely my jam, and it's such a pathway into other things. And he
Absolutely.
said
Yeah.
that he started to do this, and the people looked at him kind of like, yeah, whatever, and I'm not doing this. And this is not who I
Right.
am, and this is one of those crunchy granola moments. And he's wrote a
Right.
book, and
Yep.
this is going away. But what happened is people brought in pieces of their life that they were grateful for, or something about an experience on the job, or even about a person, or something
Yeah.
about the world. And it connected people out to something bigger than that shift that
Uh,
was about to
I
happen.
love that.
And that expanded their minds, and that is mindfulness. And they became
Yes.
more mindfully aware of the impact of their actions with each other. And he's been doing it now 3.5 years, and he's not taking it away. It didn't go away. And he said, I've been doing this for 32 years. He said, if 25 years ago, I would have stood at a shift start meeting, I said, we're all going to think of one thing that we're grateful for today, and we're going to share that. Okay, start with you, Jim. And he
Yes.
said, I would have gotten middle fingers and people walking away for
Oh,
a
for
smoke break.
sure.
It's a different
Yes,
world.
yes. No, that is a great story. It's really that kind of just pulls it all together in just such a nice way for sure. Sonia, this has been such an important conversation. I'm so glad that we connected and I got to have you on the show today because leadership isn't easy and the expectations are high. The challenges are complex. The pace of change can just feel relentless. But conversations like this, I think, remind us that leadership isn't about having all the answers, and it's about navigating uncertainty with clarity, communication, and humanity, which is what you've really brought to this conversation today. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective and your experience with us today. And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us for this episode of the Her Resources podcast. And if you liked it as much as I did, please like, share with someone else out there. Share with those leaders that you know that might be struggling as well. I think this might be a good one for them to hear because really the truth is none of us are navigating these times alone. And we have each other. Find your community. That's what Sonia's message was to us as well. And so until next time, keep leading, growing, and keep taking care of yourself along the way. Sonia, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Her Resources podcast, where women's voices, leadership, and growth take center stage. As your host, I'm here to remind you that the journey isn't always easy, but it is always worth it. Every step you take to build confidence, create impact, or use your voice is part of a much bigger story. It's the one that inspires others to do the same. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love it if you subscribed, left a review, or shared it with another woman who's ready to step into her power. And as always, thank you for being a part of this community. Together, we're not just changing conversations, we're changing the future.